So now we'll see how the equilibrium gets determined in the domestic market before trade, where the price ratio is given to us as 4 togas per pasta, or PP over PT is 4. So what we see here is that the equilibrium in this country is the point where the price ratio, which is 4, relative price of pasta over toga, is tangent to both the PPF and to the indifference curve. And that's because the slope of the PPF tells us the opportunity cost that the producers face in producing pastas or togas. Specifically, what is the opportunity cost of pasta in terms of togas given up? And at this point, because it is just tangent to the price ratio, the slope of the PPF is the slope of the tangent. The relative price or opportunity cost of pasta are the same. Conversely, this is the indifference curve, which gives the way consumers value the trade-off between pastas and togas. The slope of the indifference curve at any point is basically how many togas are consumers willing to give up to get an additional pasta. So at this point, the slope of the tangent is 4, which is also the slope of the indifference curve. So this is the domestic equilibrium point where the consumption of togas given by the point where the indifference curve and the equilibrium point intersect or touch the t-axis is CT. This is also the production of togas. And similarly, the consumption, which is this, of pastas, is the same as the production of pastas. So this is the domestic equilibrium in this country. Now let's see what happens when trade takes place. We're told that with trade, the relative price of pasta in terms of togas is 3. So what we see is that in free trade, actually pastas are cheaper than what it costs this country to make. This country is making pastas at 4 togas, but in the foreign market, you can get a pasta for 3 togas. Now, if we look at the opposite case, specifically if we look at what is happening in the market for togas, so because the relative price of pastas at home was 4 in terms of togas, the relative price of togas at home in terms of pastas is 1/4. But in the foreign market, the relative price of togas in terms of pastas is 1/3. Now what we see here is that the cost or the opportunity cost at which this country can produce togas is 1/4, which is less than the opportunity cost of togas in the in the foreign market. So when we allow for trade, what we will see is that this country will now move towards producing more togas. But let's work with this slope. What I have here is the new price ratio now introduced into this country. As a result of that, production will no longer stay here, but producers will now look to move to the point where the opportunity cost of producing pastas in terms of togas given up is what is now the international price ratio as well. So we'll look for the point of tangency between the new world price and the PPF, which occurs here. So the new production equilibrium is given essentially by the increased production towards togas. I'm going to denote the superscript T for trade and then the subscript for the particular good. And similarly, there is also reduced production of pastas. So this point is the post-trade production of pasta. So we see that this country has now specialized towards togas, and they produce more togas and less pastas. So one key thing to note here is that production is always given along the product axis. So to find the production point, we dropped a line to the t-axis from our equilibrium in production. So this gives us the production of togas. Similarly, we drop a line down to our quantity of pasta axis to get the production of pasta. So this distance is how much pasta is produced. Now, just like the producers adjusted in response to the new international prices, so will the consumers. Now, keep in mind that the entire space is jammed by indifference curves. So we have an indifference curve like this here, and I'm drawing them with the same slope. They are parallel to each other. We have indifference curves here, and we also have an indifference curve which is just barely touching the pre-trade price line. And consumers want to be on the highest possible indifference curve given the new price ratio. So instead of cluttering the graph with several indifference curves, I'm just going to draw the one which looks similar but is now just tangent to the new free trade price. I'm going to call this IC2. Initially, consumers were at IC1, and now they also move to the point of tangency, which is just right here. So with free trade, there's a shifting in the pattern of consumption as well. Consumption of togas is given by, again, dropping a line from the equilibrium in consumption to the toga axis. So QT for trade, C for consumption of togas, and the consumption of pastas is given by CT, again for trade, of pastas. So what we see is that trade has caused a discrepancy between production and consumption. Production of togas has increased to QT, but only this much is demanded. On the other hand, the production of pastas has dropped only to QTP, but consumers demand these many pastas. So this surplus of production over consumption is what will be exported, and the shortage, in a way, of consumption over production of pastas is what will be imported. So right off the bat, this graph now gives us the trade triangle, which I'm going to highlight. So the trade triangle is given by the difference between the production and consumption of the exporting good and the consumption and production of the good that they're importing. And the slope of the trade triangle is essentially the free trade price ratio. So here we get the exports given by this region. These are the exports of togas, and the imports are given by this region. So these are my imports, and these are my exports of toga. And also to notice the fact that because of trade, consumers are now consuming at a point which was outside of the original PPF. This is essentially what we mean by gains from trade. By having access to the international markets, they can sell their togas for what they were making domestically, in fact, more than that. As a result, they can get more pastas. And now a consumption point like this can be sustained. And because consumption is now above the PPF, the income in this nation has gone up, resulting from trade, and thus the country has gained from trade.